Welcome to Tuesday. It's the 9th of February 2021. Well, we have a little bit of what I'd call a standoff with the Arctic air that's in place right now. We're basically going to have today what we had yesterday. What we're going to have tomorrow is basically what we're going to have today, which means the air masses are in place right now and they're kind of at a standoff. Pacific air is pushing up against the Arctic air is pushing back. So what you had yesterday is what you'll have today. What you'll have tomorrow is what we have right now, which means get used to the weather you have because you have another 48 hours of it. This means that if you're along and east of the Continental Divide, you've got the Arctic air or you're near it. And if you're west of the Continental Divide, well, you're in the more mild Pacific air. However, we're still looking at a push of Arctic air to the south and southwest Thursday through Saturday. There are still a fair amount of question marks with our computer modeling. Computer models just do an awful job at times, frankly. They even do a worse job with the Arctic air because the Arctic air is so close to the ground. How the Arctic air interacts with the ground and the terrain is something that even the fastest computers in the world really don't have a good handle on. Now, the Arctic air, as it gets deeper, if it does, will be overrun by Pacific moisture. And this is going to bring better chances of snow to the region as Arctic air and Pacific moisture collide. This is actually a fairly common occurrence during Arctic outbreaks in the Western High Plains and Rockies. The Arctic air meets up with Pacific moisture and you get snow. We'll see if that comes together. Now, we still have a lot of question marks. The devil's in the details. When I mean that, what we mean is, yeah, we see everybody getting colder between late Thursday through Sunday into Monday. Yeah, we see a lot of areas getting snow, but the exact temperature, the exact amount of snow, well, that's where the devil in the details is. So we still have some question marks going forward. Temperatures will stay below normal deep into next week, although we do see the worst of the Arctic air easing by early next week. It does look like February, at least, next week and maybe a little after that will be on the whole still colder than normal. These are temperatures as of 5 a.m. this morning, observed temperatures, and it really shows you where the Arctic air is. You can see all the gray and the light blue. The gray and the light blue are sub-zero temperatures. Gillette hit 23 below zero this morning. It was past 30 below zero up in the Cut Bank, Montana area this morning. And you can see the sub-zero temperature readings are right along. And again, that Continental Divide doing so much to cause that Arctic air to be backed up against the mountains. But then if you go and look where the single digits and lower teens are, you can see it's gotten to the Front Range of Colorado. Look at the Palmer Divide. It's like an island there. The Palmer Divide keeping that cold air at bay. The higher terrain, Raton Pass area, you can see the Arctic air is just not deep enough to climb those higher elevations. But the cold air, where it has a chance, where the ground is lower, that's where it's going to go. So it's heading deep into the heart of Texas. And that'll be something that'll be making the news over the weekend as well. What you see here is probably about what we're going to see tomorrow morning, a very similar setup. And if we were to take a look at all of North America, you could see the extent of how cold it is. Anywhere you see gray or blue here, it's sub-zero. These pinks up here are 30 to 40 to 50 below zero. Eagle, Alaska, minus 50 up in Eagle, Alaska this morning. So the cold air is the real deal up there. And you can see, we're seeing that Arctic air now getting pushed into the Great Lakes, up into Maine now, into western New England. It'll be slow, kind of like molasses, to get it east, but it will eventually get there. And what'll happen is, you can see there's already a bulge of cold moving in. And we're going to see by the weekend and early next week, possible freezing temperatures all the way down to the Gulf Coast. This is what the upper pattern is right now. Here's the polar vortex. It's got a tail, and really this tail right here is really going to be really the weather maker for the Rockies and the High Plains, because it's this spoke of cold that's going to be coming in later in the week, while the center of cold, the polar vortex, is up there just southwest of Hudson Bay. Now, by Friday morning, this is where we are today, by Friday morning, you can see that the polar vortex has actually drifted south somewhat, south and southwest. That brings this spoke of Arctic air more southward into the Pacific Northwest and in the Northern Rockies. But it's a bit of a battle. See the Pacific winds here? So the Arctic air wants to come south. these Pacific winds, that's why it's staying warm on the western side of the divide. As we go forward, though, by Saturday morning, that Arctic air gets a bigger push and comes into the region, and the polar vortex centered right here drifts a little bit more to the south and west, just a little bit, but that's enough to drive the Arctic air further south and west. We still have question marks here, folks, on how deep that Arctic air will get and how far west of the divide it will get. This is for Friday night and the Saturday, so we've got a day or two to figure it out. But along and east of the Continental Divide, you're going to be cold no matter what. You can't escape it now. These are forecasted temperatures for Thursday afternoon. Notice they look a lot like they do now. The cold air is backed up against the divide. West of the divide, it's much warmer. However, look what happens by Saturday morning. The Arctic air gets over the Continental Divide into western Wyoming, northwest Colorado, trying to sneak into the Wasatch Front, getting further back west into Idaho, even eastern Washington and Oregon. Again, this southwestward push is still a question mark. Something that could happen is the Arctic air just doesn't get over the divide. We've seen that before, but we've also seen this as well. Now, what'll be interesting, I want you to realize and take a look here. By Saturday morning, where the coldest Arctic air is, it's going to be right here. What is warmer west of the divide here is also got higher humidity air. That higher humidity air is going to be drawn eastward in those Pacific winds, and it's got to go up and over the mountains, and it's got to go up and over the Arctic air. So I'm going to show you something that's called overrunning. Here's a little low coming into Northern California by Friday morning. Here's the Arctic air surge right here. This is by Friday morning. What will happen is the counterclockwise spin around this low helps draw higher humidity over here, and it has to go up and over the Arctic air. The warmer air naturally has more humidity because the warmer the air, the more water it can hold. When it hits this Arctic air, it's an instant way to make clouds and an instant way to make snow. Imagine the cold air, since it's more dense, is kind of like a mountain. So that warm air off the Pacific has got to go up over that Arctic air. When you force air up, you get cooling, you get condensation, you get clouds, and you get precipitation. What'll happen with an Arctic air mass, now excuse my drawing here, I'm not a great drawer, but I'm going to show you something that happens with these Arctic air masses. What ends up happening with these Arctic air masses is the Arctic air gets backed up against the front range. But what ends up happening is you get a little bit of a bubble here. The Arctic air, we'll say that with an A, it's almost like an additional mountain. So as the Arctic air has to go forced up over the mountains, it goes up even higher over that Arctic air, and the end result is you get snowfall, and you get that Arctic air actually making the mountain barrier a bigger mountain barrier, which causes more lift and more snow. So some overrunning events in Arctic outbreaks is something to always keep an eye on. Something else to bring up, that warmer Pacific air hitting that Arctic air, sub-zero temperatures. One thing about snow is that snow accumulations are highly dependent on temperature. So if it's 32 degrees, we use what's called a 10-to-1 ratio, where 1 inch of rain will equal 10 inches of snow. However, in these Arctic air masses, the snow crystals, when it's really cold, form different shapes. They stack up higher. So you could have an inch of water end up being 20 inches of snow. We could have what's called a 20 to 25 inch, 25 to 25 or 30 to 1 snow ratio. So an inch of snow in a 20 to 1 ratio would be 20 inches of snow instead of 10. So we could end up with only a quarter or a half inch of water, but that equals several inches of snow because of that contrast in air masses and the fact that the snow will form in very cold temperatures. And there you go. If we use that formula, this what's called a Kuchera ratio, which is near that 20 to 1 ratio, you can see all the pink here over and near the divide is that moisture collides with the Arctic air. Where the Arctic air is deepest, that's where the best snowfall could potentially fall in that overrunning situation. but even Pacific moisture is going to be driving snow into the mountains as well. So what we have, folks, is a confluence of events. Arctic air, Pacific moisture, possibly coming together in the region by late Thursday night, but especially if there are 2 days to highlight, it's Friday and Saturday when this snow and the Arctic air will kind of combine to bring winter weather to the region. What we have to watch is that this area's snow could end up being further north. It could also be further south, depending on the depth of that Arctic air boundary. So that's what we're going to have to figure out tomorrow and Thursday, where the deepest snow will be. This is a computer model I'm showing you. It's for display purposes only. This could shift north or south, depending on where that depth of the Arctic air is going to be. Needless to say, it's going to be wintry for everybody. Wanted to talk about next week. I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that there's really no big warm-up coming. These are temperatures by next Wednesday. 8 days from now, these are temperatures below average. So we're still talking 10, 15, 20 to 25 degrees below normal, 30 degrees below normal down in Oklahoma and Texas. It's not going to be a quick warm-up. One thing we've had this winter is when it does get cold, it's brief and it warms up quickly. That's not going to happen this time around. Thanks for listening and watching the Day Weather Podcast. Stay warm. We'll see you on Wednesday.